Okay, this one, Mark and I will tag team on again here. Um, I know that at the moment, a lot of you are not involved in replacing plants, but if you ever have to plant small plants or replace, at least we'll have gone through this. It's in the manual on chapter 8. We've already talked about the guidelines when we talked about guidelines earlier in the day. Very quickly, though, this is something a little new. The selection of new plants to be planted. The engineer, what has to happen is going to be a series of going to the nursery, selecting plants, and tagging those plants. The contractor, whoever is responsible for going to the nursery to pick them up then, has to leave that tag on until after they're planted, and the engineer or the inspector comes back to make sure those are the same plants. So it's a kind of a long drawn-out process to make sure that what the contractor or whoever is supposed to be planting the plants plants the right thing. So a replacement within, if you have to replace the plants again, it should take place within 4 weeks and so forth. All dead vegetation again. If it's the fault of the contractor for mismanagement or not maintaining the plant, if it's a newly planted plant or whatever, or it dies from drought or whatever, then the contractor is responsible for replacing it and paying for the tree. If it's the result of an accident, a car runs over it, something other beyond the control of the contractor, then the state will pay for it, but the contractor still replaces it and charges, for that. It's not your fault, but you're still responsible for replacing it and getting reimbursed. Who covers replacement costs? Okay, here. Contractor pays over here because of those things. The state pays over here because of these things. Basically, if it's not the fault of the contractor, then the state's going to pay. If it's something the contractor did wrong or didn't do, the contractor pays. The best management practices for plant selection. Reasonably good quality plants should be selected, and again, oftentimes the actual selection will be by the engineer or somebody from DOT rather than from the nursery. Usually smaller trees, smaller plants transplant better and grow quicker than larger ones. So if a big tree has to come down and be replaced, it won't be replaced with another big tree, of course. It's going to be replaced with something similar, but much smaller. Okay, the root ball. One of the main things to look at when you're planting potted plants, and this is the main way that nurseries grow plants here, from pots. On the mainland, they do a lot of field-grown stuff, so they'll use a tree spade to dig them out. We do some of that here with larger stuff, bag and burlap and that kind of thing. Here, mostly it's either field-grown or potted. And if it's a potted plant, you really do need to look at the formation of the root ball. Some of the things that can go wrong, here actually is a fairly well-formed root ball, although it's a little bit maybe beyond the point. But what you want to look for are these girdling plants here that can happen, that when it stayed in the pot too long, roots don't have any place to go. It's usually the tap root that'll come around and it'll just start going around. And here again, that's not going to straighten out. The only way to correct that, and it's not a very good way, is to cut it right there. But oftentimes, if you cut it, you're going to lose 3/4 of the root system because all the rest of the roots are connected there. So sometimes, well, always, if you see that, it's better not to select that particular plant. Just like Mark was showing here a little bit ago, once they start to girdle, they're going to continue to do that, and the plant will finally die. So don't select these girdling roots. The top collar of the root ball should be visible. When you this is this flare here should be visible. It shouldn't be buried. That's a sign that it's been planted too deep, and it can cause the trunk to rot and so forth. So you should be able to see the root collar. The trunk structure, usually a single straight trunk, at least for a small tree. Now, many trees like monkey pods eventually will form 5 or 6 or 3 or 4 main trunks, right? Main limbs. But when you plant them initially, you want to start out with one single leader, because remember, that part of the tree isn't going to grow anymore. So you want one straight one going up to a certain point before you start forming some branches. If you have one that's already forking down here, chances are you're going to get a codominant situation where that tree will eventually split down the middle. So single straight trunks, good healthy leaves, good branch arrangement. Keeping in mind, though, that when you plant a small tree, most of those branches aren't going to be permanent branches. They'll be down lower on the tree. As the tree grows, you begin to prune off lower branches as it gets bigger. And chances are the only permanent branches on that tree haven't formed yet when you plant the tree. They're going to be up here later on. But good branch structure in the meantime, just to get a good healthy tree. No injury, of course, broken, signs of insect damage, kind of thing. Looking for good healthy rootstock. Smaller trees, again, it's better to plant small trees when water is limited, but even then, it's usually better to start with smaller trees because they grow faster, use less water, less expensive, sometimes don't need to be staked. Staking only when necessary anyway, or when the specs call for it. But there's just a much better chance for survival when you're planting smaller trees and shrubs rather than larger ones. Okay, some of the steps. Mark, you can jump in here anytime. Planting. They used to think the root structure of a plant, the roots would go down into the soil as deeply as the tops are above, right? You got a 20-foot tree, you got 20-foot deep roots. Well, again, we know now that's not the case. Roots are shallow, top 24 inches at most, top 12 really, but they grow out, way out, out this way. So when you plant the hole, you don't need to plant it deep because roots aren't going to go there very much anyway. What you want to do is dig the planting hole that's at least 2 to 3 times wider than the root ball, but no deeper. Actually, a little bit more shallow is even better than that. And when you put the root ball in here, you want to put it on undisturbed native soil so it doesn't sink down. You don't want to dig it deep and then backfill. That's what they used to say. Dig it, a couple inches, put good compost and stuff and pack it in there and put it down. When you do that, often what happens is that root ball will sink over time, and it'll become down at this level now. It'll get filled in around the bottom, around the trunk here, and the bottom of the trunk will rot. And that's the number one reason for failure of newly planted trees, is being planted too deep. Wide hole, the wider the better. 2 to 3 times, 5 times is even better than that. What's an easy thing to do actually is once you dig that hole 2 to 3 times wider, if it's in heavy clay soil, after you've backfilled and so forth, you can loosen the soil all the way, just take a spade and loosen it up all the way around. That's the same as digging a bigger hole and backfilling. You've loosened up the dirt. The reason for that is that as these roots begin to grow out of the root ball here, they're going to grow out sideways, right? And they're going to come out into the area around in this area here. The looser the soil, the more easily the roots are going to move into that area. Irrigate. You want to make sure that there's some kind of an irrigation. Drip irrigation works really good for newly planted things. If you don't have that, there's other ways to do that. Mulch. We'll cover all these one by one. Mulching around just around the planting hole at first is really all that's necessary. If you've loosened it out a little bit further, you can mulch out in that area. The whole purpose of the mulch is to, 2 things, but mostly to keep the soil moist, it doesn't dry out, and also weed control as well too. And also keeping weed eaters away. from the base of the new trees. So this is, you know, kind of a quick overview here. The main thing, though, don't plant it too deep. The top of the root ball should be slightly above the level of the soil. You should see the top of the root ball. Staking, if it's necessary, if it's a small tree, you may not have to stake it. There's only several reasons to stake. One, if it's going to fall over. One, if you want to protect it from being knocked over, you know. Three, if it's in a windy area that it might blow over. And that's about it, you know. If none of these things are likely to occur, staking it is probably not necessary. But if you're the contractor and you're following the architect's specs and he calls for staking, which they almost always do, then it's your responsibility to stake it the way he tells you to do it. But staking normally is done as shown here. Here's again the root ball, the backfill, we'll talk about that in a minute, irrigated and so forth, the mound. Put the stakes, 2 stakes, one on either side, usually, and there's different ideas on this, but depending upon the wind direction, some people like to stake it like here. If the wind's coming from this way, they like to stake it with the stakes in line with that. Other people like, if the wind's coming this way, they like to stake it so it goes this way. Any ideas on what's better, or does it matter? I don't think it matters, to tell you the truth. But if it's in a windy area, if that's the reason you're staking, that's one thing to consider. I don't know which one is better, to tell you the truth.
Three?
Yeah, or 3. Yeah, then you have to work, all the way around. When you guy it anyway, you know, bigger trees, you guy it down instead of stake it, you're going to go with 3 anyway. But the stakes need to go down into, not through the planting hole necessarily, but down into good firm dirt, down far enough that they're good and sturdy. They don't have to be that tall. The attachments from the stakes to the tree can be fairly low on the tree. They used to say one at the middle and one at the top. Well, that's the worst way to do it. You want that tree to have movement, you know. So really down lower on the tree, Steve's suggestion, I think, is if you take the tree, you know, a small tree, and run your hand up until it stands up so that it's supported okay, it's not wanting to fall over, that's where the strap should go, down that low. And then one up maybe a little bit higher. But you do want that natural movement of the tree because that strengthens the trunk. Mark, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, one of the things that there's been a lot of research on staking trees, why in general it's not recommended is because the movement of the tree, there's a correlation between actually the root growth of the expansion of the roots. So it's like anybody, if you support them too long, they're never going to actually be able to stand on their own 2 feet. Where, you know, you just give them a little tough love, you know, they'll be able to support themselves a lot better. So when you stake, if you're going to stake at all, you want a lot of movement within the tree. Because again, that stimulates root growth. So it's really important because most of the time when I see people stake, the tree's not going anywhere. And then, you know, this is one of the things too. And then a year later they pull out the stakes and all the trees fall over and they don't understand why. Okay? It is really important that if you are going to stake, I personally don't like staking. I really try to avoid it if possible, but if I do, then I certainly have plenty of movement within, you know, the area.
Also, one way to do that is to make sure the ties here have some slack in them so that there's movement this way, you know. So it's not just really strung tight, you know, and that'll allow the movement. Not only on the root ball, but also on the stem itself, right? That will strengthen the stem as well. Okay, tying the stakes to the tree. Mark, you want to comment on this?
Yeah, if you guys look at this is something that you see all the time. I mean, even it's real common. They take a wire and they put a hose around, and that's probably most of you've seen on different projects. This will actually grow right over the hose. And they think that because you see the hose, it's okay. But what they don't understand understand the wire's actually cutting through the other side and halfway through the tree by the time you actually see this growing over. And there's nothing you can do at that point. You can't rip it out because you got this giant wound going around the tree. So, like this is actually kind of a ridiculous picture too, but it shows you, this should have been pruned way before it got to this stage anyways. But if you see the wire here, it literally cut into the plant. That's what it looks like.
So it cuts into the plant just as if the hose wasn't there, right? The only thing the hose is doing is hiding the fact that the wire is cutting in. So it's even worse.
That just shows you there.
Yeah. Now you can use the hose without the wire. That's better because it stretches, you know. What you want is something, see, the reason this cuts in is because the bark, the trunk is getting fatter, you know. It's not just because it's rubbing in, it's getting fatter, and the wire isn't expanding. You know, you need something that expands with the trunk of the tree. So,
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go.
One of the things too, they have steel stakes and they have wooden stakes. The great thing about a wooden stake is in many situations, the contractor that put the tree in isn't going to de-stake the tree. Because this contract might be for only 90 days to make sure that the tree survives, it's all great, and then it gets turned over. So years later, if it's a steel stake, it'll still be wired up. But if it's wood, at least the wood will get termite eaten or fall over, and then somebody will have to get, those wires or they'll die, whatever the stake is. The other thing too, that's a little unique, at least that I do, if I'm doing that, I'll actually use like little bungee cords that I know will deteriorate within a year. And it gives it plenty of slack to go back and forth. So I won't use like the standard ties that you see because they last too long. I don't want them to last. I want, whether I'm there or not, a year from now knowing that this isn't going to happen. Whether, I pull it up or not. I know the wood pole's going to deteriorate, and I know that my bungee cord is going to just break off. So it's, just a little, insurance for the tree.
Mm-hmm. If you should be removing these, if it is stake, within one growing season, no more than one, and usually before that even. One growing season here in Hawaii is, 1 year, but 6 months probably. The main thing is to get the roots established, and then you don't need the stake anymore. If roots don't get established within 1 year, something's wrong.
Yeah, within 3 to 6 months, that should be the max.
Yeah, you should be able to, kind of pull on the tree a little bit. Is it tacking down? Is it, and then it's good to go. Take the things off. More harm normally is done by staking than not staking, but sometimes it's necessary. Or if it's specced again, you need to do that. Soil amendment, talk a little bit about that. Soil test is always a good thing to do. We're kind of at the point now where the recommendation is if the soil is good, don't fertilize. You don't need to do anything. Just put back in native soil. And it's good to go. If you have some really bad soil, then you need the soil test and you need to do some soil amending. It's better to amend the entire area if possible. Just amending the planting hole oftentimes may do more harm than good because you're creating kind of a pot where those roots kind of like it in that soft, rich compost, and they tend not to get out of the planting hole, especially if it's a heavy clay soil. So some amendments, if it's really a bad soil or a very sandy soil, sometimes sandy soils are not very nutrient rich. So there are some cases where you might want to amend better the entire area rather than the potting hole. Mark, do you have a comment on it?
Yeah, if it's a sandy soil, like what Jay said, you might want to throw some mulch and things in there. It won't retain water. Or if you have a clay base, you might not want to water it as much because you could rot out the roots. So you don't want it to go anaerobic. So again, if it's sandy, you're going to have a higher water requirement than if it's a clay base.
Okay, and if you do, here again, this is all in the book. If you do have to do a soil test and you do want to amend, these are the recommendations for clay soils and sandy soils, okay? Basically compost. Compost is always good, you can't go wrong. But again, the more you amend around the newly planted tree, the better off you're going to be. Once the roots grow out of that, then they're going to be on their own anyway in native soil. So only if you have to. Irrigation, There's various ways. If you have an irrigation system, that's the best deal. Tree bubblers are good if you have an irrigation system. If you have hand watering, of course, sometimes the only answer. Gator bags are being used. You're familiar with gator bags? They're big plastic bags. They use them a lot for newly planted palm trees. They're just big plastic bags you can fill with water, and they go right around the tree. And there's a little trickle thing at the bottom. You fill them up every 2 or 3 days. You don't have to go back and water. That's just to get them established. You see more and more of that. I don't know how effective they are, but they seem to be, working. So there's various, but the tree does need to be watered. A newly planted tree absolutely does have to be watered. Okay, steps for proper planting. Here, first of all, we're going to go through these real quick, one at a time. First of all, look up. Look up for wires and lights and so forth. You don't want to be planting underneath a wire here. You want to, if you can, prevent this kind of a situation. That tree shouldn't have been planted there, but it was probably maybe even before the pole went in. I don't know. But you see a lot of this, and there's pruning techniques to take care of it. Line Electric is expert at that, if you call it that, I guess, that kind of pruning. But that could be prevented. You don't want to plant a tree where you know sooner or later you're going to have to be pruning it out. Dig a shallow, wide hole, as we said before. Shallower, a little bit shallower than the root ball, much wider than the root ball. Measure the distance, but just make it wider. Before you go too deep, put the potted plant down in the hole to see if you haven't dug, see how much deeper you need. If you go too deep, it's kind of hard to correct because you want it down on good firm soil. If you have to backfill too much, there's still the chance that that's going to sink in and eventually cause problems. So dig the hole a little shallower than the top of the root ball. These things. This battery's going dead. I may have to ask you to. Nah, it's dead. Can you do it for me? Dig it as wide as possible. Again, at least 3 times is the recommendation, especially in heavy clay soils. Sandy soils, it doesn't matter so much. Sandy soils, the roots are going to move out very, very easily anyway. The main thing, again, like Mark mentioned, with sandy soils, you might want to amend it with a lot of compost because sandy soils dry out really quickly. So if you amend around the area just with compost, and the easy way to do that is to just rototill it in down to 6 or 8 or 10 inches, all 2 or 3 feet out from the outside of the tree. Again, when you plant it, the root flare, can I use your pointer? The root flare should be visible, so the top of the root ball should still remain visible. It may dry out a little bit, but those are only little tiny feeder roots that don't matter. The backfill should be just native soil. What you dug out, you put back in. If you don't need to fertilize, don't fertilize. If you do need to, follow the recommendations as before. A very soluble fertilizer like say triple phosphate or something like that is not good. That's going to burn the roots just like it would be burning the roots. They used to put a lot of that in the bottom of the hole, then put in everything. If you put it in the bottom of the hole, as it dissolves, it's going to go down, right? And the roots don't go down, they're going out. So you're losing all that fertilizer anyway. It's better to mix it in or even just sprinkle it on top, but not very much. You can do, again, more damage by over-fertilizing than by not fertilizing at all. Mulch on top here again. Okay, next. Okay, step 3, find the topmost root and treat any root defects. Next. Here it shows kind of exposing the top of the root ball. Expose the root flare. Sometimes these have been buried in the nursery too deep. The root in the root ball, the bot will be way up in here. Oftentimes, if that happens, this will be rotting out. You want to expose that. So you want to remove any loose dirt on top to get down to the top of the flare and make sure you have a good healthy root ball. Okay? This again is a desirable one where the root flare here is visible, it's not been buried, and there's some good healthy roots up here. But the main roots that you want to be looking at are ones that are a couple inches deeper into the root ball. Okay? Here again, a good quality root ball is one not like this that's been filled in the nursery where the dirt's been piled on top, because you can get new roots coming out here. You can get the screen kind of moving all over the place like that. So you want this kind of a situation here rather than this kind of a situation here. Now, in areas where drainage is poor, it's actually better to dig a shallower root ball so it's not sitting down in a deep, undrained planting hole. Probably better in that case not to plant in an area that is like that. But sometimes it is okay to plant it a little bit more shallow. But avoid this situation here. Okay? Remove excess soil. Again, all this from the top. 3 inches of soil here were removed. You can see all that soil was taken out of this pot to get down to the actual roots. What had happened here is they just dumped more potting soil on top. And if that had stayed there long enough, the bottom part of the tree could be already gone. Okay? Root defects, any root defects, if you can correct them, it's better to not select a plant with a major root defects. But circling roots, small circling roots around the outside can be taken care of by lightly slicing around the outside of the root ball. Big ones, though, no. It's better to leave those alone. Okay. What you want to avoid, defects at the top of the ball. Here again, you could take this off to avoid, or maybe that one off, to avoid this going like this. But that might result in 90% of the roots being cut away. You don't know what's down there. It's better just to avoid this kind of a situation. Okay? Look for the roots that circle. This is good. Circling roots on the little light white roots on the outside are good. That means that this plant has been in the pot long enough to develop a good healthy root system. It hasn't most likely been in there long enough to form these woody circling roots. Sometimes, though, even with this, if you take that out, there's still a good sized circling root in there. But in this situation, you can cut down around maybe just enough to cut through these outer roots. New roots will form at the cut ends. You don't want to rough it up too much, though. But this is a fairly good, well-formed ball. Okay. Cutting the circling roots again. Take a razor blade or something. Cut down several ways around the outside. New roots will come back at the cut ends. But you don't want to cut all the way down through the root ball. Just the outside. Okay.
Yeah.
Here's an example where the outside looks pretty good, but see all these circling roots in here? Big woody circling, girdling roots? That's not good. If that was in a root ball, you wouldn't be able to see that necessarily, you know. So sometimes what you see is not really what's there. Chances are, if you have a big tree that looks like it's been in the nursery in a 10-gallon pot or a 5-gallon pot, chances are this is going to be the case. Sometimes it'll have grown out of the pot down into the ground, right? Okay. This is the kind of thing that'll happen with circling roots. It'll just stay in the planting hole. It won't move out. The roots just keep doing this. Tree falls over. Okay? Even if you stake it up, it's going to fall over when you take the stake out. Okay? Steps. Okay. Okay. Put the tree in the hole, of course. Next. To avoid damage, you don't want to handle it by the trunk. You want to handle it by the root ball or by the pot. The heavier the tree, the more likely you are to try to pick it up by the trunk. But you can do some damage by doing that, so it's better to handle it by the trunk or by the root ball rather than the trunk. And sometimes it's a little difficult to get it into the hole like that, you know, but it's better to do it that way. Okay. A tree in the hole next. Position at 1 or 2 inches above the soil line so that you want the top of the root ball a little bit above the top of the soil. Notice here they're not digging the hole very much wider. That's not 2 to 3 times, right? So what you need to do here really at this point, after you've got it all said and done, is loosen this all the way around, really loosen it well. Or you're not going to have a good loose area for the roots to grow. Okay, next. Position the tree in the ball. See how much higher this one is? See, this is the level here, and this is that much higher. Sometimes that's okay. Sometimes that's okay. This is a little bit extreme though. Mark, what do you think?
Yeah, 50%. It should be 10%. So if you have irrigation and things like that, you know, it might help out. Who knows, on top of that burlap, there might be a lot of excess that might not be the root flare. So when you pull it apart, you know, a lot of that will just come out. But Jade's absolutely right. You know, you're looking at a small amount. Remember, the roots don't go deeper than 24 inches because there's not any oxygen down there. So they'll suffocate. So if you overplant it, and sometimes people do that when they don't want to stake, thinking they're going to stabilize it, it will suffocate. It takes a long time. You know, it might even take just a year for you to suffocate it, but you can eventually it will.
Okay. Too deep, add soil to the bottom. No. That's your only alternative. Better dig another hole. You know, you want it. If you're going to add more dirt to the bottom, make sure it's really fully packed down and it's not going to sink in. It's pretty hard to do because when you start watering, all that soil begins to settle anyway. So if you've dug it, say 8 or 9 inches too deep, and it's only a 12-inch hole anyway, chances are it's going to sink down at least 2 or 3 inches past that point. So better just start over here and dig another hole, and this time measure. You know, okay. Okay, what's wrong with planting it too deep? Well, here again, soil around this area here is going to rot the bottom part of the trunk. Like Mark says, if you plant it too deep, the deeper you go into, especially heavy clay soil, there's less and less air, oxygen at that level. Roots need oxygen, air to grow just like everything else does. If you plant it too much, too high, then all these things begin to happen. String and stuff. Any wrapping should be removed completely. We don't have a Baldwin burlap here. On the mainland, you get a lot of burlap that's wired or tied together and so forth. All that should be taken off. Don't plant that in the hole. Even if you take it off the top, what's left in there, especially wires and things like that, can actually girdle roots over a long period of time. Of course, take it out of the pot. Some people leave it in the pot. They think, well, okay, the pot's good, and it'll just grow out the bottom of the pot. Well, remember again, roots like to go that way, so not a good idea. Okay? Okay, again, make sure the trees stay straight. Okay? Before adding backfill, be sure to check it out, make sure everything is looking honky-dory there, because that's your last chance. If you put it in and fill it back up, or if it's a good-sized tree, you don't want to be pulling it back in the other direction. Okay? Remove any synthetic material we just talked about next. Get rid of all that. Burlap, plastic especially. We have oftentimes things wrapped in plastic here if they're field grown, spaded out, and the roots are temporarily plastic wrapped. You want to get rid of all that before you put it in, okay? Burlap, okay, here again next. Backfill, okay. They used to recommend that it's in the planting hole, you want to make it nice as you can, as rich in the soil, and just like putting it into a pot, because that's going to help new roots develop, and it will. The downside of that is that if you make it too good, and it's a heavy clay soil around there, and you dig the hole. You know, sometimes when you dig in heavy clay soil, you glaze the sides of the hole, especially with the tree spade. That's a clay pot, you know, and the roots are growing in a nice, soft, nursery-type potting soil. They hit the side of that hole, and they do the same thing as they do in a pot. they'll start to girdle. And it may take them a long time to get out of that pot if they do at all. The alternative to that then would be to loosen up around the area. But it's better, they say now, if you have a fertile enough soil, don't worry about amending the potting hole, because just put the native soil back in. That's good enough. Now again, there are exceptions. If it's really heavy clay, some compost all around the area would be good. Sandy soils, again, some compost mixed in would be good. Not necessarily fertilizer, but just good compost. And then firm the backfill as you put it in. Good to put it back in layers, water it in, let it settle, stamp it down, another layer, stamp it down. Make sure it's, you want to avoid air pockets. Air pockets will dry out. Okay, next. Okay, add the mulch on top, as we said before, and then to enlarge the hole, just take a spade or a shovel and just loosen the dirt all the way around it, all the way out, maybe 2 or 3 feet, as far as you can go. What works good too here is if this is a fairly shallow, like a 12-foot hole, a rototiller. If the soil is soft enough, just rototill the heck out of it all the way around it, open it up. The whole point is loosening the soil all the way around the potting hole. So either doing it by spading it or by rototilling it. Steve said he uses a water jet thing to inject in there and break up the soil all the way around. Various ways of doing it. Okay. Okay, this is the result then of enlarging and the hole and packing it back in. Okay. Pack the dirt back in, good. Okay. Water and backfill to settle. Okay. And finally, then mulch on top. Mulch it. It shows the mulch here pretty close to the trunk. That's a no-no. I think anyway. That's mulch. Maybe not. But mulch should be at least around the outside of the loosened area, around the area of the top of the root ball, but not right next to the trunk. Again, the reason for the mulch is to keep it moist, to prevent water loss. This is showing some drip irrigation here. Mulch should be no more than 3 inches thick. Good wood chips are the best to use. Good size wood chips. You can use lots of different things to make good mulch. Actually, good mulch, if it's permanent, is gravel. Pea gravel. It stays put. It holds the moisture. Does the same thing as wood chips do. Easier to maintain. They don't blow away with the blower. So if you want a good permanent mulch, gravel, good sized gravel, works really well. Crushed coral, not so well. Crushed cinder, not so well, because that blows away. Doesn't stay there.
Jay, also, so where the irrigation is, you guys don't want it at the front.
Right. This is not.
So this wouldn't be a good example of what you want to do, but more of an example of what you don't want to do. So at the end of the root ball is actually where you want the irrigation. So that way you're encouraging the roots to go out, not staying close to the trunk.
Right. But you do want to keep the root ball wet too.
Sure.
Yeah.
But those are emitters, so those will go out.
They'll go out and do the whole area. Yeah. And if you use this, either emitters like this or drip or whatever, as the tree gets established, move them further out. You don't necessarily have to add more, just move them further out, because that's the area where the new roots are continuing to grow out into the native soil. The quicker the roots get established out into the native soil, the better off you're going to be. Okay. Add mulch. Thought we said that. Go again. Okay, mulching. Areas like this, 3 inches or so thick. Apply a thinner layer of mulch over the root ball if necessary, but keep it at least 10 inches from the trunk. Okay. Again, that's going to cause the trunk to rot if it stays wet. Okay. Mulch as large an area as possible. You can hear it. There's a good 3 feet or so around, and this can be permanent. This actually does a lot of good for the tree. It looks nice, in a park setting. Roadside, maybe not practical, but in a park setting or whatever. Possibly interchanges even too, where you can do this. You don't have to mow around it. Often in interchanges, there's low-lying limbs. I know the one out here on H3 entering from Kailua. There's a really nice air interchange here. Some of the tree limbs are still pretty low. It must be hard to mow under. Mulching around here would eliminate the need, for mowing under areas like that. So this kind of mulching is good, okay? This is not such a good idea. Just a small amount of mulch in an area is not doing much good there at all. Weeds and so grass is allowed to grow up right around the tree. Thing here is that this grass is going to take away a lot of the water. Grass really sucks the water and the nutrients too, okay? This is not good. It's called volcano mulching. Piling it up, up a foot or two or three up on the side for obvious reasons. For some reason though, I grew up on the mainland in cold weather country. They do this a lot during the winter. I see a lot of cedar trees and things like that especially. And they have all this mulch piled up, sometimes 2 feet up on the, I don't know why,
I've seen them do it with straw.
Yeah.
And in other countries like Japan, they wrap their trees.
Yeah.
They wrap it with burlap. And the reason for that, and it's really thick, because it'll get so cold it'll actually crack the trees. It'll do a lot of damage. So
Maybe it is a straw type thing.
yeah, because I've seen them actually do it with straw in some places. That's just to keep it warm. So when you get these 3-foot packed in snow, again, it's not going to freeze up the tree.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay. But we don't do that here. We don't have to worry about snowpack here. Okay, next. So, adding the berm. Okay, the watering berm. This is important just in the beginning. Add a little dirt berm around, just on the outside of the root ball. The idea there is that if you're watering, hand watering or whatever, you're watering into that hole. It's going down on top of the root ball initially to keep that wet, and then eventually extend your watering out. After several months, really, probably at the most, that berm isn't as necessary. You're watering out beyond that anyway. That's only a temporary thing. You don't need to keep it there. But it is a nice thing to have if you're going to mulch, to keep the mulch outside of that area once it's established. It's a nice little border to keep there, to keep the mulch away from the base of the tree. Okay, next. Okay, stake and prune if needed. Okay, next. Various ways of staking we've already talked about. You have stakes that go down here. You have various kinds of things that tack the root ball down. Guy wires here for larger things. 3 of them here. 2 stakes here. These they actually have pieces of some kind of material that go all the way around the top, and then they stake that down. Are you familiar with those, Matt? I've seen things in magazines. They got all kinds of weird things. Stakes actually now just wires that will go down through the root ball rather than staking it. They just stake the root ball down through the root ball. So various ways of doing it. Okay, next. If you have to, it's better not to do any pruning, but any finished pruning just to take away dead leaves. You don't need to take away to prevent wind sail so much like they used to say. They used to say take a lot off to bring it back into perspective with the roots. Anything that the tree can't support, it's going to drop anyway, leaves and so forth. So better not to do any pruning until after the first year when it's established. Okay? Next. Fertilizing and planting, no. What they say now, if you have good fertile soil, not necessary. But if you do fertilize, use slow release fertilizers. Don't use soluble fertilizers. They'll burn the roots. Okay? Irrigation again, very often at first. Mulching to control weeds, minimize compaction and so forth. Next. This is the tree planted correctly. This is one planted too deep. Again, 3 or 4 inches, you're going to get soil filling in around here, rotting the thing. This is actually a little bit above the level. That's the correct. Soil flare is there visibly. That's good. Okay, next. Okay, the BMPs, for planting grass, we don't need to get into that. Well, real quick, the soil preparation is the main thing. Make sure this is the main difference between planting grass and trees. It's really important to do a soil test and amend the heck out of the soil the best you can. Compost, fertilizer, pH adjustment, because that's the last chance you're going to get to do it. It's not like a garden that you can plow up and start over. So it's really important, and in the book it goes through all the things. Make sure you get a really good soil prep and get rid of the weeds, okay? I'll tell you, okay, here again, this is more soil prep. Getting rid of weeds, Roundup over a period of time. Since Roundup is systemic, it takes a while to kill. Things may come back. If you've got a lot of weeds to begin with, you kill them down first. First thing you do is fertilize and irrigate, because remember, these weed killers aren't very effective if the plants aren't growing, healthy plants growing. Same with weeds. So you're going to get a much better kill if you have an actively growing weed. Several times to do that, and then start your soil amendment next. Hydromulch the seed in is the best way to do it. Erosion control, they have mats now that you can, I'm sure you're all familiar with that have seed implanted into the mat. They've used it on right outside the Poly Highway, I saw, coming down for that. The seed is right in the mats, and it grows right out of it. It's really a good thing, and is a good erosion control thing. Okay, next. That's all we need to go. Okay. And again, this is all in the book. Okay, lights, please. Can I have lights? Sorry this took so long. And I know you guys don't do a lot of it, but who knows, someday.
Okay, come on, don't be shy. Okay, if you guys could start digging the hole. Right there's fine. Okay, while they're digging the hole, you guys come closer. Okay, while they're digging the hole, what we're gonna do is examine the tree. Come on guys, come in closer.
I'll stay behind them so they're not blocking me.
Okay, so here's the tree we got. What do you guys think just by taking a fast look at it? Can you see that?
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
Okay.
Okay. Well, we're going to take a look. One of the things that would concern me a little is that the whole thing is only soil. Okay, so again, that's just something that you might want to be aware of. Okay, what we're going to do is that, here, what do you guys do? We're going to bang the pot, and we're going to try to go ahead and get... Okay, so here, if you want to grab the brick right next to you and start banging on the pot, because we're going to have to loosen it up before we pull it out. Okay, so come on. Yeah, and all we're trying to do is loosen up the... Very good. Now, because this is soil, this is a lot harder than it would be if it was another type of medium. Yes. Hopefully we could maybe find some car parts we could use or something.
There was a spark plug. I see a bottle.
Okay. You know what? We got to bang it a little bit more. It's not quite there.
At the bottom.
The very bottom.
Okay, here we go. Okay, so if you could pull this out. Okay, now one of the things here, this is what we're going to do. Instead of trying to pull from the trunk, what I'm going to do is hold the trunk, and then he's going to pull the pot. Okay? No, because it's got to go back in the pot. So, okay, so here, pull the pot, and I'll hold on to the tree. There we go. Okay. I'll pull it all the way off. Okay, so you guys just take a look over here. What do you guys think of the root zone? What do you guys think? Okay, it doesn't, it's one of those, doesn't look terrible, but it's not great. What we're ideally looking for is white new root form. Here, what we're already starting to see is some girdling. So what we try to do to eliminate this before it goes in the ground, I take a sickle and I just come down here and just slice the roots. And what I'm looking for is not just the little ones, but the ones like this or like this size. So if we could just roll this over a little and I'll just keep on slicing. Okay, see over here how large these are? Everybody can see this? This is the ones we're trying to eliminate. Okay, one more time, if we could roll it over. Yeah, that way. Okay, perfect. Okay, so anyways, what we did was to cut the roots, so wherever we're cutting, it's like a branch. That's where the roots are going to shoot out from, and that's why we're doing what we're doing. Now, can you pass me one of the shovels? Now we're going to see the depth that we need to actually plant. So the whole, can I see one of your shovels? Okay, so this is how we do it so we don't have to keep on lifting up the plant with the pot and everything else. Remember, look how deep that is versus the root ball. You cannot go by the size of the pot, we're going by what the root ball is. That's when they say 2 to 3 times the size, it's the size of the root ball, not necessarily the pot, because this is only halfway filled. So right here, if we're going by the depth, this is how deep we're at. So we still got to go down a little bit more, about up to here. Okay, while they do that, then what we could do is go over the tie straps. And there's a lot of different types of straps that we use. Now, one of the things is, you see how there's a rough side, there's a smooth side? When you put this in, you want the smooth side to go in so the rough side doesn't damage it. So when we go to tie it, what we're doing is wrapping it around an area, putting it through, and we can adjust it. And then when we have the stake, we go ahead and you could either screw it or pound the nail into it, and that will support it. You know, over here, we're gonna, in this situation, again, this is just for demonstrations, but this is a small tree. You know, there wouldn't be a reason that typically we would want to stake this. Okay, with that said and done, let's see about the structure. Okay, if you notice, over here, this is where the root flare is, right? You know, all the roots, they had it covered up to over here. Actually, I think it was up to here. So, no worries. So anyways, what we're trying to do is we're going to bury it. This is going to be our level, not where the soil was, but where the roots start coming out. The root flare is what we're looking for. This is a little deceiving, you know, because you see it was a little girdled here. So it flares up and then comes up. Okay, so anyways, here, you know, there's only really one thing that I'd want to prune, and that's this area right here. Now for pruning, I really prefer hand saws, and the reason for that is because you can do a real exact cut. These are small teeth. I can do, you know, small cuts without stripping. If I did that with a bigger hand saw, they have bigger teeth, you know, you'll tear it. So when you're cutting, that's why they have all different sizes. Okay, so can I see, we're gonna measure again and just put one of those flat so we can see that. There we go. Okay, so that's really good. Now, if you guys come over here, when they were digging, what's a common practice in a clay soil is what they call glazing. And what that will do is it will create just a bigger pot. The roots will have a hard time getting through glazing. So what we want to do is when you have this, you just scour it a little. So by just twisting it like this, and on this side it's not as bad, but you just kind of break it up a little. And it's easier for the roots to go through. Otherwise, if it's glazed really bad, and you typically get this with tree spades, the roots will be pot bound. All you're doing is changing one pot to another. So this is how we avoid that. And again, we just go through, scour the side a little, and it'll be easier for the roots to break it up. Now when we're putting the plant in, when we're doing the backfill, what we want to do is add water. The reason being, it's like what Jay said, we don't want any air pockets. So you want everything to compact down. Water does a really good job with that. So right now, if somebody could grab the plant, put it over here. Okay, so you want to grab it from the bottom to support it. There you go. And just stick it in the hole.
Watch the back.
Excellent. You're hired. Okay, so the wind's coming this way, right? Like right now, we're having the wind coming this way. So typically what you want to do, it's already pronounced going that way. You would want to go ahead and turn it this way. So you do like about a 180. You guys get why we're doing that? Okay, right, because again, yeah, it's going to eventually straighten out because you're going to get more growth over here. This side will get, you know, wind blowing a lot, and this is going to be the side it'll take most of the gas. So anyways, we're set with that. As you can see, you know, it is above grade. Now what we need to do is stake. Okay, so can we have a couple other volunteers? Here we go. Okay, come on guys. So grab the stake pounder. Okay, you ready? Yeah, there you go. Okay, if you notice, we're putting the stakes on this side of the tree because, okay, start going. Because this is the predominant wind direction right now. So we're gonna have the stakes over here. Oh, you gotta keep on going. Oh, no, we're just doing... Yes. Yeah, it gets kind of hard in there. Okay, so can you, a few more? Okay, you want to hold the tree and hold up there? Okay, let me try. See if we can get this. Okay.
You're hired. Yeah.
Okay, so now we have our tree stakes, and then we put another one directly on the opposite side because again the predominant wind's coming over here. So we have two different types of, you know, ties over here, and again in this situation we wouldn't necessarily have to stake the tree based on the size, but this is just for demonstration purposes. So there's a lot of different ways we could do it. We can go ahead and tie it like this, and we can also just go ahead and, yeah, that's what I want to do. Okay, so we could do a bowline and then just wrap it around like so. So the other way that it's really common, that's even a little quicker, is we wrap it around here, comes through here, and then we can connect these. The nice thing about these, like see how far away it is? It's obviously not going to connect. Even if we adjust it, Still a bit of a stretch, that's not bad, but if it's further away, we could interlock these. So, you know, that's kind of nice. So anyways, we just go ahead, do this to support it. There's still plenty of room for this to move again to stimulate roots. And then we backfill. And when we backfill, again, we'd be adding water during this process. So, okay, let's go straight on to pruning. Anybody have any questions? Okay, let's go.
You know when to take a big mistake, return it off.
A good thing is to every once in a while just test it. You know, shake it, see, you'll know based on the stability of the plant. And if you have that, then you can take it off, and it's certainly better sooner than later. Okay, let's go do some basic pruning. Okay, who can tell me what this is?
Hey,
Yeah, he's right. So what's this? An improper cut. This is a stub. So this is something that if we were going to remove, you'd remove. You see this? Joe already knew this was dead before I even started cutting into it. And that's what happens when you leave stubs. So no matter what, you want to avoid that. What type of cut is this? What is it? A topping cut. You guys are right. And it's also called an internodal cut. So this is not to the node. It's not to a lateral. This is a topping cut. Again, it's indiscriminate. So if our goal is to actually lower the height of this, we can do that without topping the tree, and it's important to realize that. There's a difference between lowering the height, a height reduction, than actually topping. This is topping. I could have easily accomplished the same thing, you know, by just taking this down to here and leaving this. So a good example is, say this is going up too high. Well, I'll do my undercut, and then I'll do my top cut, which didn't work. And then I'll go right back to the collar. You see? I can lower the height. If this is still higher, I can then take this all the way back to here. So there's all different size saws, and it's basically, a lot of it is based on the tooth. So if you're actually trying to do smaller cuts, you can use another saw with smaller teeth closer together. It won't have a tendency to strip as much. So here, one of you guys, come on, volunteer. You're drafted. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do a height reduction. So we're going to take this out and show me where the collar is. The collar of the tree. So just point out where it is. Okay, so you want to be real precise. So show me very good. So that's where your end cut's going to be. So we're doing a 3-cut process. So you want to do an undercut on the outside, then you do your top cut, and then you're going to finish up with your final cut. Okay? So go a third of the way in. Okay. Well, you can adjust the saw so you don't have to hit it. There you go. Okay, that's good. Okay, good. Now we're going to take it back to the collar. Yeah, good. Okay, perfect. Great job. Okay, so that's how easy it is. And again, with a plumeria tree, it's real easy to see where the collars are. So, you want to volunteer? Even if you don't, you want to come over and do this? Okay, so let's just take this off. And the same thing, you want to use the 3-cut process underneath, on the outside, and then go back to the collar. And see here, the collar's a little weird because there's some deadwood, but you see right where it is? It's where the diameter gets much lower. It's pretty extreme on So, right. Right. Right, but your angle's a little off, so you want to be like this. So what might be difficult, because this might be in the way, so you might want to come over here where I'm standing and go on top over here. There you go, perfect. Good job. So that's a good introduction to, just some basic pruning. Anybody have any questions? Okay, well, thank you very much.